We are architects and designers, and we work often with making of objects. So in a sense, although we make things, we make objects, we design things, we don't see ourselves as making architecture or making graphic design. We see ourselves as managers of habitat. We create things which we all exist within or around or upon, and those things that we make have an effect on ourselves and on the world around us. So habitat is a very interesting word. Most people, when they hear the word habitat, they think about something like a botanical installation or something biological, like the relationships of living things between each other, plants and animals and microbes or human beings to these things. And that is one type of habitat. But another type of habitat is what is called abiotic. In other words, the non-living things that surround us. Things like rocks or even soil. If you remove all the bacteria and the life that is in soil, it's an inert thing. So all of these things form habitat. And also the things like buildings and rooms and all the plazas that we create form our habitat. And it's the interaction between these living things and the non-living things that creates the world we live in. So everything in this room is a piece of habitat. We've taken on a few very unusual projects. Some of them have no human clients whatsoever. In this particular case, we designed a beehive for bee habitat. We saw, as many of you have seen, that around the world, beehive populations are diminishing radically. And of course, we all rely on bees and their pollination habits to provide us the food that we eat. And so our survival depends on the humble little bumblebee. One of the problems with bee habitat is, of course, chemical agents. And as architects and designers, it's hard to manage that. But another problem that bees have is that they are overly domesticated. So nearly all of the bee population is used to domesticate honey production. So imagine if you're a bee and you're in a honey production center. Every morning, somebody will lift the top off of your world, spray some smoke in there, knock you out, and then scrape all the honey off, and then put the lid back on, and you wake up about 20 minutes later going, wow, what just happened? Where's my honey? So this particular project is developed in order to provide habitat for the bees that is not meant to domesticate the creature for honey use. So it's simply providing them a safe haven for living, and they can be mounted, these hives, on top of any structure. We knew that to ask someone to put a beehive on their house probably wouldn't be a good thing, so we made them very sexy looking so that everybody says, I want one of those on my house, even if it has bees on it. So there's a way of inviting these structures into people's lives. We've also created an urban nest, a bird's nest, that can be integrated into a building facade so that creatures like birds that are displaced by the buildings that we create can find new homes on those very same buildings. We have made a project which is quite unusual. It's an observatory for overlooking wild reindeer herds in northern Norway. We also discovered that the same building is an interesting stopping post for the muskox that live in the area. So here you can see some of the muskox living nearby the pavilion. Once you're inside the pavilion, there's a wood bench that allows you to rest. It's a keyless structure. It's never locked. And you can look down from the safety of this space without interfering with the life of the wild reindeer in the valley below. This is actually at the mountain, Snøhetta, which I will mention in a moment, where we're located. The mountain Snøhetta is in the background there with a little wisp of cloud on top of it. And as you look at it from the distance, it reflects the sky into its facade and in a way competes against and works with nature simultaneously. The last of these projects to show you is quite unusual. We're actually reconstructing a waterfall in Oregon in the United States. This is the second largest waterfall behind Niagara Falls in North America. And over the past 2 centuries, it's been industrialized and the water's been displaced to run mills and hydroelectric plants and so on. So all of the buildings that you see here in the foreground running along the edges of the river used to be a waterfall. So the waterfall now is just this tiny little piece at the very end. It's almost a trickle of what it used to be. So all of these industries have moved out, and they now are all empty. All of the buildings that you see here are absolutely empty, and the waterfall in the river is inaccessible. So this waterfall has tremendous meaning to many people, including the First Nations people, which some of you might refer to as Native Americans or Indians that live in this region. And there are several tribes who treat the waterfall as sacred, and they still fish for lamprey, which is a kind of an eel, yearly during the season. Buildings themselves have importance to those that colonized the region from Europe and came long after the First Nations people. And as those buildings decay, some of them can be preserved to represent the history that has existed here throughout different generations of time. And so we'll save some of these buildings, and we're going to reintroduce the waterfall and allow it just to flood the site. And we'll move through these buildings, exposing the natural landscape and allowing you to see the waterfall interact with the intrusions that human industrialization has brought. Some of the structures will carve out and create new habitat for bird life, flora and fauna on the upper levels, knock some holes through some of these grand industrial concrete structures so that you're able to oversee the waterfall and once again have access to this magnificent feature of nature. Well, all of this is happening within our studio, all of this design work. And you may ask yourself, well, what kind of studio does this? What sort of habitat do you have in your studio? Well, it's very interesting to me. If you talk to most architects and designers, they will probably be somewhat left-leaning, kind of progressive people thinking about social issues. But if you walk into their studio or their office, they're the most hierarchical structures you've ever seen. This gigantic pyramid, I mean, they would make the Vatican blush, I'm sure. It's just an intense kind of environment where you have the great leader and an army of slaves producing their napkin sketches. So we have tried to break with this in our habitat. And so one of the things we have done is we've named ourselves after a mountain. The mountain Snøhetta, which is located in central Norway. It's where Valhalla of Norse mythology is located. So it's a wonderful place to see, but a beautiful place, but an interesting history. So no, Snøhetta is not a name of any person. People often meet me or meet my partner, and they'll say, well, it's nice to meet you, but when do we get to meet the Snøhetta person? So we give them directions to this mountain, and hopefully everything works out. We have a number of studios. We like to be close to where we work, so we have a studio in Oslo and New York and San Francisco, and we have a wonderful group of people, each developing their work in these places, a wide range of cultures. We're architects, landscape architects, interior architects, branding and graphic designers. We strive to hold as close as possible 50% male and 50% female workforce. We try to keep different ethnicities alive and thriving in our practice. We have 15 nationalities working with multiple languages. We're proud to say we have 14% left-handers in our company, so yeah. We're working on getting that higher, but I have tried to write with my left hand. Another thing that's important is that we really get physical in the work we do. We really like to just push ourselves with each other to make things. So this is a wonderful picture of people making a model together. It's very hard to do. It's hard enough to get people just to talk together, but to get individuals working on a single physical object at one time takes a great deal of patience and skill. And this can be people that are well skilled in architecture and also very young people. So the person in the light blue shirt towards the top is actually an intern helping to develop one of our projects together with other architects in the studio. When you enter the studio, there's no receptionist. So nobody is there to greet you or tell you not to go here or go there. In fact, in the studio in New York, you walk right in to the kitchen. And so the kitchen is your introduction to our office. We put a beer tap in the kitchen, so you can see it back there. And we were a little embarrassed, so we put this fruit bowl in the foreground so that people might think we're healthy. And we have a little bell that we ring when there's very good news if someone has a baby or something like that. So laughter is important in how we work. We move across disciplines. Architects can be landscape architects, interior architects can be branding designers. People work across the limits of their discipline. So this is a view of the Oslo studio during the day. We use this big room filled with just big tables, so there's no real private meeting rooms. In the morning, people work, and then we eat at these same tables. So then at lunchtime, people eat, we all eat together. and then eventually the eating's over and we go back to working together. So it's a nice rhythm to eat and to meet, and that's a very useful tip for you in your practices. One thing that is certain is that people are not abstractions. We have to understand that while we do, in a way, create a theory about formal development, whatever it is that we make in our studio, we first try to understand what kind of action or reaction this will create in the habitat that surrounds it, whether it be human or animal or plant life. So for us, looking at people, understanding people helps drive the development of the work. So why is this image in a design seminar? One thing that's certain is that it's a difficult image to look at. There are two people in serious disagreement. And you see pictures like this often, of course, especially these days where the world has become more and more polarized. The first thing that we often do when we see an image like this, and we'll start to blame people. Well, it's the guy on the right. He's clearly just an aggressive, mean person. Or it's the guy on the left. He must have said something that was wrong. Or it's the politicians that promoted this kind of activity. Or it's the people in the background who maybe egg them on. Everyone gets the blame except for us as designers. We don't see ourselves as a part of this. But the truth is, everything that's happening in this image is occurring within the confines of the spaces that we have created as designers. So the plaza was made by a landscape architect. The building and stairs in the background were made by an architect. Everywhere you would look around this photograph is a place made by us as designers. So clearly, we can't be removed from the equation. If we design things that don't allow people to feel natural in their own skin, to feel that they belong in this place, that they deserve to be here, that they own their future, then we will create habitats that promote this kind of polarization and anxiety. Think of it as a polar bear in the zoo. You've probably seen a bear in the zoo, a polar bear. If the zoo structure is not made well, the bear will pace back and forth, it will hurt itself, it will be aggressive. And if you put the same bear in a much broader context, even if it's in a captive location, it will be more relaxed and act more naturally because the first enclosure did not allow for it to live naturally. And essentially, we are all making our own zoo. Everything in here is part of the zoo that we made for ourselves. And if we don't make it right, we're going to start hurting ourselves and get aggressive, just like any creature might. And of course, this is well established by Marshall McLuhan, the great thinker and philosopher from Canada. He said, the environment that humans create becomes their medium for defining their role in it. So somehow this is an important consequence of what we make. So just to show you a few examples of how we are working with these ideas, you may know this project. It's the National Ballet and Opera in Oslo, Norway. One of the interesting features of the building is that although traditionally opera structures can be very off-putting to people, they're very imposing. In this particular case, you can walk all the way to the roof of the opera, stand on top, and take a look around, and it's yours. So even if you haven't bought a ticket, you can visit the opera. Inside are wonderful spaces where you can have informal performances, and in this case, this is in the lobby, and that sculpture in the background is by the gifted sculptor Olafur Eliasson, who spoke here also at this conference. We have made it such that the building dives into the seawater of the fjord, so you can go right down and touch the water. We eliminated 60,000 tons of pollutants in the fjord in order to make this building happen. So those swans and other fish life have now returned to an area they haven't been in for 200 years. And even very strange, like human creatures, like that guy standing out on the end with a hat, have shown up. So we'll see what happens to him. We were given the commission to make the National September 11th Memorial Museum Pavilion at the site of Ground Zero in New York City, where these tragedies, terrible tragedies occurred in 2001 and 1993, where nearly 3,000 people have died. This commission was quite a challenge for us as it was shrouded in trauma, and the site is rather psychologically challenging. One feature that's interesting to note about the building is a wonderfully large atrium that floods the museum with natural light. And as you move down the steps of this atrium to the museum that is primarily below ground, you pass by two magnificent columns that were recovered from the efforts to salvage the site after the two World Trade Center towers collapsed. So these are two of the original columns from the original buildings. And as people walk past the building, it's somewhat reflective, so they enjoy walking up to see these columns or to see what's inside. And since there are also people inside walking down these stairs and looking up, what you see when you look in is someone else looking back at you. So there's this moment where people kind of go, whoa, there's people in there, and they're looking at me. So in this particular moment, this tiny fraction of a second, you recognize a complete stranger as part of your existence. So there's a connection that you're making with someone who you don't know. And in that way, the building reflects the present moment in time. It does not reflect the absence of those who lost their lives here. It reflects your existence in this place. And sometimes people like to walk up to these reflective glass windows and see themselves. And this young girl I saw one day when I was visiting the museum, and I was profoundly happy when I saw this. I took the picture rather quickly. She's looking at herself in the glass. Her mother's taking her picture, but actually not her picture, her reflection, the mother. And there's a smile here, and I thought, if we can bring one smile to one face at a site of such tragedy, then we will have somehow succeeded in our work. We've made a number of other smaller projects. This is a rocking garden in San Francisco where you can, we created like a little grass lawn that you could sit on as you walk down the hard surface sidewalks of the city, and you could also rock back and forth on it. We began to work with children in different ways, so we were asked to create a corporate headquarters, a sort of community center for people that work at the Swarovski company in Austria. So instead of putting the children's area sort of in the back, we actually put the children in this tall building, a playground for them, and the adults are in this very dark, lonely thing on the bottom. So what you have is a 5-story play tower. So every floor is a children's playground, so that families can bring their children there who play through the different floors. There's trampolines, and they bounce up and down. And I suppose because they're Austrian, they're not afraid of heights. So this is quite good for them, and it's a wonderful place to see. Another unusual project is this small pavilion built for the Light Festival in Singapore. It was a temporary project, only to be used for a few weeks during the year, and then it was to be disassembled, and most people would just throw away their pavilion after the festival was over. But we decided that we should make the pavilion reusable, so nothing in the pavilion would be thrown away. So the bamboo was reused, but most importantly, the lights that you see there are solar-powered light. So they generate electricity after capturing power from the sun, and we would send each one of these to a small village in the area surrounding the main city, and they could be reused. So they've appeared all over. People send us pictures of these lamps being used to show people how to get to their wells where they don't have any electricity for their community. Another thing that we do is branding and graphic design, which is a little unusual. You may be a bit surprised. I'll only show you one example. We won a competition to rethink and recreate the national currency of Norway, which you see here. We made one side of the currency, another artist made the other side, and this is our side. And each one is an image of a landscape that contains water in different wind conditions. Of course, something you would be familiar with here in Cape Town. But what's wonderful about these bills is that if you place them together and make a single line out of them, they create a work of art which is exactly equal to the amount of money you just used to tape them all together. So it has a kind of a value in that sense. We're finishing a number of other projects. A little kitchen in California. We'll be opening a museum of a reconstruction of the caves at Lascaux, a tremendous cultural center in Tehran in Saudi Arabia, and a library in Canada. One of the projects that we just finished is a student learning center in Toronto, and it's formed by this wonderful blue chip of light that draws your attention to it as you enter the building. You walk under this folded metal panel ceiling, and it guides you into the building and projects light into the spaces below, and these sort of panels move into the lobby and provide an unusual sky over your head as you move into the building. Each floor of the building is unique. This floor is called the beach. So it looks a bit like a beach, stepping down to a blue carpet that's a bit like the ocean. The client said, I want a room where anything can happen. So I always say, be careful what you ask for. So we made the beach. Anything can happen. And now they have problems because the students are showing up in beach clothes with beach balls and towels and everything, necking in the corner. So it's quite a fun place. We've just finished the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art expansion. Here you can see an art museum, but also a museum that can be occupied on the outside as well as the inside. There's 45,000, I should say 4,000 square meters of free public space in this museum where young people can enjoy works of art without buying a ticket. The stairs are rather dramatic, and before we finish this expansion and renovation, 80% of the people using the building use the elevators. Now it's exactly the opposite. About 80% use the stairs, and it's because they're a dramatic adventure leading you through the building towards the galleries that are above. At the top of each stair is a view to someplace with often a seat where you can relax. And then when you enter the galleries themselves, they're softly lit, and the focus of the eye is towards these great works that the collection contains. Another unusual project is the reconstruction of Times Square. So we were given, rather strangely, the commission to take all of Times Square between 42nd Street and 47th and somehow make it a better place. You know, New Yorkers really have despised Times Square because there's so many tourists there and it's so hard to get around. So we were going to take Times Square and turn it from this, and we've turned it into this. So we've permanently removed traffic from Broadway for 5 blocks in the heart of New York City, removed all the cars from these streets and replaced them with people. It's the first time a master plan for the area has ever been approved, and of course you can imagine how scary it was to tell the taxi drivers that we were taking cars off of Broadway, but actually traffic runs more smoothly and people have more place that they can enjoy. The surfaces are very simply treated with these little reflectors that reflect the light of the marquees into the surroundings. We made these 50-foot long, I should say, what would that be, about maybe 15-meter long benches that are about 2.5 meters wide. And you can sit on them in different ways. They were designed entirely around making your butt happy. So I often say, if your butt is happy, you're going to be very happy too. So this is a character of the kind of ergonomics of design. People use these in so many ways. They completely occupy these benches nearly 24 hours a day. You'll find people using them in all kinds of ways. This one's amazing, where everyone's just standing on the bench. One of the amazing characteristics of the design is that even before we were finished, we started to take some statistics of the changes in the area. There's been a 40% decrease in pedestrian injury, 20% decrease in crime, and a 60% decrease in air pollution because of this one move. And most importantly, there's been a nearly 100% increase in city and state tax revenue, meaning that there's enough money from these 5 blocks in which cars were removed that can pay for 7 times the Parks and Recreation budget and for half of the entire police department budget, just from these 5 city blocks by removing some vehicles and some spaces. So it works. On a smaller scale, we did the same thing in Guatemala City. I was there one time at a conference just like this, and I gave my talk, and at the end there was a Q&A session, and a person stood up. I didn't know it. He was the wealthiest patron in Guatemala, and he said, "I love what you're doing. I will build you anything you want in Guatemala. What do you want to build?" And I, like, oh, geez, I'm sweating, and like thinking about the Mayan Museum and all of these things. And then I realized, the sidewalks are so messed up in Guatemala City. Maybe we should just fix the sidewalks. So I said, I can't think of a building. It won't do you any good. What good's it going to do if we have a nice museum? Your sidewalks need fixing, so fix them. So he said, okay, I'll pay for that. So we designed sidewalks and benches for people in the city because most of the time people have to sit on the street like this selling their wares, and we would make a bench that they could use to sell things from or to sit on. We hired local Guatemalan craftsmen and artisans to decorate each bench group so that it held the character of its place. And then we started setting them out on the street, fixing the sidewalks, and now they get used really all the time. And people continuously also send us little images of how they're being used. So they become proud part of allowing people to understand their surroundings. We had the fortune to work with President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama together with them on the Presidential Library project. We're not designing or building it, but we were part of the process. So that's me on the right. I'm not the tall guy in the middle. You might mistake us. But it was a great experience. And you know, Barack Obama said to me that he actually wanted to be an architect before he became a politician. I said, thank you, please. I'm so glad that you didn't become an architect. And wonderful people. These are just some of the sketches that we provided for them that one day perhaps will be presented in other features. One of the things we did, and I'm going to get to the end here, is that we talked about how do you understand people in their places and what should go there. So what we did was we walked the streets of Chicago, the south side of Chicago, and it's a pretty high crime area, and rather embarrassingly walked up to people and said, hi, I'm an architect. What do you think we should do? Well, we knew that wouldn't work. Probably somebody would just hit us. So instead, we asked everybody one question. What makes you happy? And we compiled all the 70 films into a series of films. Here's a cut from just some of those.
Makes me happy. Family makes me happy. Pleasing others make me happy. Seeing that I can put a smile on someone's face makes me happy. Seeing that if there's something I can do to uplift your day, that is what truly makes me happy. Pleasing others. I'm a pleaser.
My grandbabies make me happy. I got 6 of them. They range between the ages of 3 and 18.
Eat right is very important to me. The breakfast is the most important meal for me. I like vegetables, fruits, grains, beans. I'm sorry, but I don't eat the meat.
The last one here is the most profound.
What makes me truly happy is my faith. I've been through kidney failure, liver failure, 2 comas, and after I was fine, walking again, learning how to do everything, they told me I had cancer 3rd stage. I did a year and a half of my cancer treatment. Now they say I'm cancer-free, so don't sweat about the small stuff. Just be happy, because life is what it is. Every day it's a gift.
You could not have better advice. So these are the things that we learned from these people, and I would suggest, to a certain extent, and these are all photographs that are part of our collection, just go out and look at people. You may design objects, but try not to spend all your time looking at other objects. Look at people. Just look at them in their face. Spend time just watching how they react or change or shift very subtly according to their surroundings. Getting to know their faces helps you understand who it is that you're making things for. And without that degree of empathy, which takes a great deal of practice, it's very hard to control or to manage the physical objects that you create. So this is a very important lesson for me and for many in our office about how to approach the design of objects. I'm going to leave you with one project here, which is our first commission that we acquired in 1989. It was to revive the Great Library of Alexandria in Egypt. It was an enormous undertaking. We were all very young. I was 28 years old myself, and my partner Chittle, I think, had just turned 30 or was just over 30, so we were just kids when we had a $380 million project dropped in our lap. So it's an unusual way to start a practice, but we persevered. I often say that it was our naivete that gave us strength. Anybody smarter would have walked away the second they saw the circumstances, but we were stupid, and that gave us tremendous power. So the other thing that was good was that we were young, because anyone older would probably have died during the process of making this building. It took us 13 years working night and day, dedicating our lives to it, and that was a great experience for us. And this is when I met Chittle, and we became partners. The project went through so many consequences of life. The Berlin Wall had collapsed. Of course, the Soviet Union had collapsed. There were the Middle East peace talks that looked like there might be a future for peace in the region. The Lebanese Civil War came to a conclusion. Things just seemed like they might be better somehow. And then, of course, as you see on the far right, 2 planes hit 2 towers, and we've been living in the consequences of that political strife since that time. Our building was completed at the same time that this tragedy occurred in New York City. So things changed rather radically during all that period. But the building is still running. It's still being used. It had 10,000 visitors a day, and it has that same number now. It was designed for handicap standards, for wheelchair use. It's the first building that allowed men and women to use the collections equally with equal access. It allows women to work in the building, and in fact, in this building, over 50% of the workforce is female. That's an unusual statistic in the region. So it had a great deal of interesting social characteristics. Unfortunately, not only was there the challenge of the World Trade Center attacks, but shortly after the building was in operation in 2011, there were the Arab Spring, and these were the first pictures that we saw. Our site is basically right behind these buildings, right where that smoke is coming from. So we saw this and were immediately stressed. We said, oh my God, the library is burning down again. It has a history of burning down, so perhaps we should find out more. So we sent questions to our friends that were in Alexandria, and they sent these pictures out, which you might have seen on some news sites. The students of Alexandria University and the citizens of Alexandria formed a human circle around the building to protect its contents from damage. These were both pro-government and anti-government groups who set aside their differences to protect a piece of cultural heritage. So there's a tremendous lesson to be learned in the power of culture as a keystone in our world. And this was the last picture, some of the last pictures I was sent, a woman in a traditional outfit photographing some contemporary art on the wall with her phone. They lit the roof of the building pink to signify Breast Cancer Awareness Week. This was unthinkable 20 years ago, 25 years ago when we completed the building. And most importantly, the Young People's Library has been expanded from 200 seats to about 800 seats. And I love this picture of these young girls learning about architecture in a very unique way. So that concludes our work, and I'm going to stop now and just show you and share with you one thing. Of course, an arch is a very important component of architecture, and as you understand an arch, it's a kind of self-sustaining feature. It holds itself up. But the most important feature of an arch is the keystone. And if you remove the keystone from the center, the arch collapses. And our world, our society is much like an arch. We're self-supporting. We have a strength in numbers. And in some places, it's our culture that is the keystone. And here, in this world, perhaps it's your constitution that is the keystone. There are many great figures that have come from South Africa and from this region. Luthuli, Mandela, de Klerk, and of course Desmond Tutu, who's affectionately known as the Arch. And we thought, after having a meeting with several people in different circumstances related to Indaba, the idea came forward from a group here. Maybe we should make something that relates to these great people and to the worlds that they built. And of course, Desmond Tutu is a tremendous figure in leading our understanding of a better world. So the theory was that somehow there could be an arch for the arch. And we started to discuss that even further. And here on the upper right is the theater that we're in, and there's a wonderful place just nearby the Company Gardens at Whale and Adderley, which is right next to St. George's Cathedral and to the Parliament Building. It's a wonderful place that all of you probably know of, and we thought, just as an idea, what if there was an arch that was made here in this place that represents so many different worlds, the worlds of our faith and the worlds of our politics, the worlds of those places where we come together and where we sometimes divide politically. And so this is that location looking even closer. And so conceptually, we began to think, well, what if it were something made out of strands, somehow something that could be woven together into an arch? And it was discovered that your constitution here in South Africa has 14 lines in the preamble and 14 chapters in its main text. So it was thought perhaps this arch could be made out of 14 strands that somehow meet but don't exactly coexist together in a way that we easily understand. It takes time to understand. And these strands could be carved with these 14 lines. And of course, many of the words are wonderful. The most beautiful are the most sublime and the simplest. We the people, for example, is a powerful line in your Constitution. So these sketches were made, and well, it was just kind of thought, well, why not? And couldn't it go here? And we began to work together with people here, and we eventually met through others. A wonderful architect, it's called Local Studios here in Johannesburg, and Thomas Chapman has been a part of making a small prototype. So is Thomas here? This is Thomas. So this is the man in South Africa who made this prototype.
Thank you.
And I'm going to show a few more slides, but the most important thing here is that Thomas started to make this thing kind of out of nothing, out of dust. And he worked together with a wonderful craftsman named Dario, who's from Croatia, from Split. And we just didn't think it was possible. Of course, there is this arch, and there will be an idea of connecting this arch to the arch. And in some way, we hope that we will be able to think about a dream that might happen. Anything can happen here at Indaba, and there's a dream that's possible.
Thanks, Craig. So this is a real team effort, and I've been asked to introduce a few very important people, special people who are linked to this project. But first, before we do that, Craig next to me is going to read a letter from the Nobel Peace Institute.
Thank you, Thomas. It's a very powerful message, and I'm very happy on Schittle's behalf to share this with you. Dear Archbishop Desmond Tutu, from Oslo, the city of the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Center sends its warmest regards to you. You gave hope and energy to the anti-apartheid movement from the 70s. For many decades, you have encouraged and inspired millions throughout the world who are fighting for justice, equal rights, and democracy. You continuously show leadership and give moral guidance to all those who believe we must side with the weakest and the poorest who need us most. With your visits to Oslo, you have spread your smile and optimism to us and to the many visitors at the museum. We remain thankful for that. Our mission is to inspire peace through stories like yours. Your way to freedom and justice has always been a peaceful and inspirational one. It is a way that has left its imprint on history and our understanding of true leadership. Your legacy is one we are humbled and proud of bringing on to future generations. Best regards, signed Liv Tørres, Executive Director of the Nobel Peace Center, written 5 days ago. Thank you.
Thanks. We couldn't actually make this project happen without the incredible support of some of our corporate partners, and I'd like to call Thabo, the CEO of Liberty, onto the stage right now to read us a sonnet. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We are really honored as Liberty to be associated with this wonderful event. In 21 years of celebrating the Constitution of South Africa, we felt it was an important occasion since we are celebrating our 60th birthday anniversary as a company. It is a celebration of freedom, which is why we honor the Arch. To the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, our Arch, to the man who speaks truth to power, who stood always at the heart of the fight, who shows the power of peace and calm, to our laughing bishop, sometimes stranded, often tender, man of God and grandfather of the people, whose broad shoulders comfort the nation. We honor you, our Arch, with 14 lines before 14 chapters, now written on the 14 arcs of wood. Each bowing wooden arch, at once strong and yielding, creates a space of shelter and stillness for all, providing shade, but never blocking the view of the sun. Archbishop Tutu, much loved, we honor you. Accept this as our tribute to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So part of my job as the local architect is to get this thing passed through council. And I'm hoping, it hasn't happened yet, but I'm hoping that by calling the mayor of Cape Town, Patricia de Lille, onto the stage right now, we can make that process a little bit easier. Madam Mayor.
What a great honor to be here. I would like to greet our own Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, our own Emeritus Arch Dungani, and our Archbishop right now, Archbishop Magoba. And of course, we also want to send greetings to Mama Leah Tutu that is not able to join us here today. And of course, the CEO of Liberty that have just spoken. When we conferred the freedom of the city of Cape Town to Archbishop Tutu in 1998, these words were dedicated to him. And I quote, "As a man of peace and deep-rooted spirituality, he has stood at the heart of the struggle for human rights in his country and has worked unceasingly to build a non-racial society where all people of this rainbow nation can become equal claimants." Close quote. Almost 2 decades later, these words continue to ring true in our country. Arch, through your leadership, you have bridged so many divides and brought together rich and poor, black and white. The preamble of our Constitution states that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. Your moral leadership, Arch, and authority has always inspired us. With your humbleness, you warn us not to become arrogant or discouraged, and you continue to motivate us by reminding how far we have come as a nation, but never forget where we came from. So on behalf of all the people of the city of Cape Town, I want to thank you and Mama Leah for being our guiding lights at all times. Thank you for teaching us about courage and conviction. And Cape Town is going to be very honored to have this masterpiece right here in our city. Many of your contributions to our country's history is woven into the history of the city of Cape Town. And this installation will continue to remind us about your legacy, your values, for many, many decades to come. And this will be a daily reminder that the struggle for freedom was not in vain. Nkosi sikelele Afrika, God bless Africa, God seën Africa. Thank you. Woo.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He really insisted that this arch not be only about one arch, but about 3 arches. So we've actually got the previous Archbishop, Archbishop Ndungani, with us today as well as Archbishop Thabo Makoba, and I'd like to invite them onto the stage right now, please, as well as Bishop Margaret Virtue.
I'm quite overwhelmed, and am thankful for the complexion I have, because I'm just stunned. Isn't it a wonderful thing? I mean, that the arch has to depend usually on pillars as it stands. The arch, this arch, would have been absolutely nothing without all of those fantastic people such as yourselves. Of course, can you imagine when we said, now we've got to march, and nobody pitched up? That would have just shown the world how absolutely nothing we are without you and those who have gone before you. And so I want to say a very big thank you to yourselves and your forebears. And thank you for all of those who have been responsible for this magnificent occasion, and those who have thought up this quite remarkable concept. I hope they get my nose right. I just want to say a big thank you to God and to God's fellow workers. You. God is immensely proud of you. You destroyed a vicious system of injustice. And today we are free. Never mind the problems that we have. You destroyed a vicious system. And you ought to pat yourselves on your backs. All that we did was articulate your aspirations and to remind you, you are not second-hand. You are not a feeble copy. You are a glorious original. And God is looking down and saying to Madiba, hey, just look at them. Just look at them. Just look at what you, Madiba, Thabo, and all, Bears No Day, and all of them, just look at them now. Aren't they just fantastic? Thank you. Baya Danki. And goes. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that on behalf of the church, I need to thank you for who you are. You are not only the arch, but you were the keystone that held the arch. And not only the keystone that held the arch, but you were the ground on which the arch stood. You ushered the biblical values that finally became part of the constitutional values in the preamble to our Constitution. You treated all of us, all South African, as created in the image of God and reflecting the spark with which God has created them. You encouraged us to celebrate difference and to respect the environment. God is also smiling and say, thank you, my dear son, for your laughter, for your very big heart. And our commitment and prayer is we will make those constitutional values real, because in our current state, we seem to be sitting lightly on the constitutional imperative. So, Tata, on behalf of all of us, Sithi enkosi for who you are.
Thank you, Father.